What I want to talk about today is really in three different sections. And the first is to talk to you about strategies that you can use with families and caregivers to prevent violence in kids today. The second part will be about technology guidelines to share with your families. And the third will be about cyberbullying, its impact, and what we can do about it. I want to say to you very clearly that the shootings in Newtown broke my heart. I sat and cried. I hope that some people out in this world are listening, are feeling those tears. I know everybody here is. And after Columbine, I wrote a book on raising kids based on my concern about what's been happening to children in our world today. Everybody in this audience, I've been listening to who's coming in from Child Protective Services, CASA, we have school districts, we have folks working with kids in detention, we have supportive services across the spectrum. And I know, as Robert Frost once said, for parents, when their child bleeds, they bleed. When their child has a problem, it's a thorn in their parents' hearts. I would say to you that in the field of social services, of counseling, I find that these are all of our children. It's not just the parents who bleed. So since the Newtown shootings, I have been focusing more on violence and its protection, its prevention from violence, of violence amongst our young people. I want to share some of those thoughts with you today, please. I'm going to tie together research and experience here. First thing I want to talk about is something that we have known for a very long time, and this came out of the research of Werner and Smith, who followed children in Hawaii for over 20 years, impoverished kids, many of them multiracial, many of them from very low economics, and the concern was what would make these kids resilient. These kids had been battered, they had been sexually abused, some of them, they had been harassed, they had been taunted, and yet we found some of, oh please, if you're coming in, come up front, come on up front, you don't need to sit in the back. We found, it's like, you know, when you go to church or temple, those seats up front are just wide open, so come on by, come on by. What Werner and Smith found in their research of which kids turned out, again, people into their 20s, and why, they found the number one thing was a strong adult role model in their life. If you had somebody who could help you through adversity, somebody who could show you that life could be good and help direct you on the path, you had an exponentially better, more significant opportunity to have a future. And we need to keep that in mind. That person needs to spend time with them and to listen to what they say. And we call these kids charismatic, or I'm sorry, these adults, we call them charismatic adults, because for the young person, they carry that sense of charisma, importance. The charismatic adult that Werner and Smith found, of course, would be best if it were a parent, right? But parents weren't always the people who were going to be the role models, and you and I know this in our work. I don't find a lot of parents who don't love their kids. I do a lot of work in child abuse, et cetera, and I'm hardened sometimes when I see what people have done to children tragically, and yet when I sit in children's court mediations and we talk about terminating their rights, I don't find many parents who want to give up their kids. I think most people love their kids, but because of situations, etc., lots of drugs out there, alcohol, substance abuse, childhoods themselves, they can't take it forward. So these charismatic adults, many times in our world, they aren't the parents. Who are they going to be, though? They're going to be professionals like you. They're going to be the CASA folks. They're going to be extended family. They're going to be neighbors. And Maya Angelou is a heroine of mine. I love her. I was very fortunate to meet her and have an interview with her at one point. And I'm sure you've heard this quote, but I find it very meaningful. She said, "I've learned that people will forget what you said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. And that's what you folks do, and that's what the strong adults in these kids' world can do. If you'll bear with me, I want to read you a story that I put. This is a book that I wrote, a little book that I put together, Unleashing Kids' Potential. It's cited at the end. And I'm going to read a few stories from here. I'm not here to sell these today. They're online. You can go through your Kindle or something and get it. But any funds from it, I think it's $8.99, go to charitable organizations. But I do have a few stories that are true research things that I might share with you this afternoon. This was the book I put together after Columbine that I mentioned to you. And Elie Wiesel, who wrote about the Holocaust, later said that we all have to be watch people for the vulnerable, and that's what I think you are today. Watch people for the vulnerable, for those kids. From her work at the Child Witness to Violence Project at Boston Medical Center, psychologist Maxine Weinreb relates a conversation she had with Michelle, a woman physically abused as a child by an alcoholic father who beat both his wife and daughter. While Michelle also had a depressed and unavailable mother and a hearing loss suffered from untreatable ear infections, she grew up to be a successful professional with a wonderful sense of humor and a variety of interests. When her own preschooler became overly active, she turned to the center for help rather than repeat the cycle of violence. When Dr. Weinreb asked her how she'd grown up to be so stable and healthy despite a horrible childhood, Michelle gave much credit to her second-grade teacher. Sensing that something was wrong in the child's life, the teacher had insisted that she stay in her classroom instead of attend a special class. The teacher nurtured her with support and care and spent time with her in frequent after-school conversations. Despite the teacher's questions about whether someone was hurting her, Michelle never would talk about her father. He had threatened to kill her if she told anyone, and she believed him. She kept this terrible secret to herself for years. Yet, as she went on to new classrooms and life situations, Michelle reflected that the second-grade teacher's love and concern sustained her like a candle in her heart. Like a candle in her heart. Because it's psychologically safe, school is a refuge for many children. In spite of her home, Michelle developed a positive self-image through a meaningful relationship with a teacher. It doesn't have to be a teacher, although that was second in Werner and Smith's research as the person who could make the biggest impact. What we're finding in our communities now, especially with the press on for class sizes to grow, the stressors on teachers, the testing kind of mania that's going on in many of our public schools, it is indeed people in the community in social services who are that person. I want to talk to you more about preventing violence. Now, it's really, really important that we understand that kids need someone to listen to them. When Jerome Kagan did his international research on what teenagers found most important, and he studied kids in the United States, he studied kids in Japan, he studied kids in Africa, and he said, what shows you that an adult really cares about you? The kids were just about unanimous. They said, the adult spends time with me, and the adult listens to what I have to say. Those two things, cross-culturally, internationally, matter. Our research ongoing, read this just a few weeks ago, shared meals at home. I know people are busy and kids have activities and they're running around, but another way to keep our kids from violent behavior is to have that time, to make that time to talk and listen to them. We're finding that 20-minute dinners, about 4 times a week, 2 major results: improved relationship in the family and less obesity. Isn't that interesting? You sit down to dinner, and yet less obesity. Why do you think that is? Anybody? You're talking instead of eating. I like that. Yeah, okay. Good. What else?
Satisfied in a different way.
Thank you so much. Yes, so your emotional needs are being met, aren't they? Over here, what we find is that we have to help families understand that we must never, ever hit a child or another adult. And we have to teach them alternate disciplinary methods, a time out, a time away. I find it very interesting, as Kathy mentioned, when I do mediations, and I brought some information for you about that, but I mediate for the Dispute Resolution Center. They just took the Bar Association's award for nonviolence, for supporting nonviolence across our county. And I mediate some of the civic community kinds of things, which are disputes over property, a lot of money kinds of disputes. I do family ones where parents have separated and they're settling out visitation. They're settling out, I do some child support things, adjustments with the Attorney General's office, and then I do the children's court mediations. But I am overwhelmed by the number of parents in my family mediations who feel that the only way to handle a disruptive child is to spank him or her. And spanking many times involves belts, involves the things that you and I don't need to get into this afternoon that you see so much in your world. Now, I was mediating a family dispute over visitation, and young couple, very nice people. We get great people. It's just that sometimes we have to kind of put forth some things that to us maybe are common sense in our world, but if people in their own experiences don't know them. So mom says it's over a 3-year-old girl. So dad's called the mediation because they've never lived together, but he wants to see his little girl more. He loves her. So mom says, yeah, but she's afraid to go there because he hits her. And then we got into the whole thing of, well, he said, yeah, but that's what I have to do in order to get her to mind. So mom said then she doesn't want to go anymore. So I got into my little, I'm supposed to be neutral, so I really try. But what are other ways, positive ways when she comes to be with you, that you could both feel good together, positive things you could do? And then if she acts up, what are some kind of time out sorts of things, or time away if she's getting agitated, things that you could do? And Dad agreed. And he said, but don't tell her. And he made Mom promise she wouldn't tell her. And she said, okay, I won't. So I had to ask, I said, so why? Why can't she tell her that she's going to have a good time when she comes to see you? And what did he say? Because if she thinks I won't spank her, she won't behave. So what was Dad running on here? What was Dad believing? Fear. Thank you so much. That fear was the way. And we have to understand that with our families, we'll talk more about time away, but time out if they need to discipline kids, but turning it into a positive thing. On your chairs, there's some information. I'm not going to go into it at length, but there's a couple of flyers from the Dispute Resolution Center. And I think what surprises me sometimes is that people don't know about it. Bexar County has, I believe, the largest in the state of Texas. It's free. It's free. We see people there from all economic levels, but especially people who really couldn't afford legal services. The courts love the DRC because that means that it's not only less expensive, but people talk through their differences. We avoid violence there, and we get people coming back frequently. So just so you know, on the green sheet in front of you, types of disputes, as I say, everything from community and consumer types of things through family, different family issues. And it is so remarkable to be with such a fine group that's mainly volunteers. I'm a volunteer, mainly 138, I'm going to say, volunteers and a very small staff. All day, evenings, both English and Spanish, and people sitting there, and the number one repeat comment that I get all the time during a mediation, whether it's over auto repairs or a child and visitation, is, it's so calm here. It's so quiet here. You sit in a room and you just discuss things. And what we have to teach adults sometimes is to use their words too, instead of other things. So anyway, for your information, and we have more of these, this is for your families whom you work with, and if you feel that you want to share these with them. As I say, when they call downtown to the number, they do intake, and usually the mediation is scheduled within 10 days to 2 weeks as soon as they get that paperwork scheduled. So I think it's a pretty good deal.